Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interview. As you may know, a few months ago, I was able to go to Jalsa and talk to different Ahmadis about their school of Islam and how they approach Islam. And I was invited back out to have a more in-depth conversation because last time I had a few short interviews, wasn't able to go too deep into the weeds. Today, I wanted to learn more about the history and some of the principles behind Ahmadi thought. And with me is Farhan. Farhan, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, LT, thank you for having me. My name is Farhan Naseer. I work in the Times Ahmadis Canada, which is a theological institute in Canada where we train students to become imams and missionaries for our denomination, our Jamaat. Jamaat means our community. So my role here is as a librarian, and I help our students with their research and other tasks. Not much to say, right?
And you're fairly well researched too. Like you spend a lot of time reading and stuff.
Yeah, I do get a lot of time to read. Being a librarian, you have a lot of books at your disposal, and free reign to buy more books if you need to.
Awesome.
So I do get a lot of time to go deeper into our literature, other people's literature, without any time constraints, right? It's not for an assignment. It's not for work or anything. I can sit down and take a book for a year if I need to. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, just before we came on here, you were telling me a little bit about how you're preparing for some lectures and stuff about some of the things we'll be talking about today. So I think that'd be great to hop into it. But I would understand the Ahmadi tradition can be traced back to Mirza Sahib, right? Could we just get a little bit more of a background and history of who he is and sort of the timeline of events within his life?
Right. So we believe in Mirza Ghulam Ahmad as being the promised Messiah for Muslims and other faith groups. His mission was to unite humanity to a single belief rather than having multiple different types of beliefs, right? I mean, everybody believes in God, right? There's a lot of people that don't believe in God, but identity of God is what's more important. And this is what is the real purpose of religion, identifying who this God is, what his qualities are, and how you can have a relationship with him. With that, also how to engage with each other so that we're not stepping on people's toes or violating anyone's rights or anything like that, and having a proper society where we recognize each other as brothers and sisters in humanity or in faith right? And able to build a society. And this is what Islam is actually meant to do. The Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, he established order in the world. He lived in a time of pure chaos, pure injustice and oppression, and through a divine teaching that he received from God, he was able to establish peace and unify a nation within a 23-year lifespan. Which is unheard of. You can't do that. Even with today's modern age and people being so open and knowledgeable, people stick to their guns.
Yeah.
Right? Literally. Right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult. So what did he achieve, and how come Muslims lost it? This is the question. And this is what he also warned Muslims about, that a time will come when you won't be the way you are today. And like 1400 years ago, when you were all united and you were praying together, and you were so he actually laid the foundation for Ahmadiyya from our point of view.
Okay.
So that's why I'm going back to him.
Okay.
Because we don't believe that there's a need for a new teaching. Our understanding is that the Holy Quran is a complete guide, a complete teaching, instruction for humanity on how to live our lives for the pleasure of God and not for anybody else's pleasure. But with that, what we understand is that over time, nations do digress. They do lose interest. They lose the teaching. They get divided. This is a human phenomenon that has happened in every religion. And it's something that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, warned us about, that you will become divided. You will have the same issues that other people have faced. But with that warning, he gave the hope that God will protect you by sending someone to reunite you again. This is where the prophecies of a Messiah or Imam Mahdi come in.
Okay.
And this is really the crux of the matter in terms of our place in Islam.
Yeah.
Whereas other Muslim groups are waiting for a Messiah or Imam Mahdi, we have an interpretation of those concepts that show that he had already come.
It's, if I understand correctly, your view is more metaphorical in a sense of how you envision the return of the Messiah versus some other schools of thought, which tends to be a little bit more literal. If you can go into a little bit more.
Yeah, so this is it's a really interesting question because you have to understand the foundation of the belief.
Mm-hmm.
Are you rooting your belief in the Quran? Are you rooting it in the Hadiths? Are you rooting it in both? And if you're rooting it in Hadiths, which books of Hadiths are you rooting it in?
Yeah.
And this is why it's a very complex issue and people have a lot of trouble with it because there's so much information about it that sifting through it and figuring out exactly what's going to happen becomes impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And so much so that normally when this issue is talked about, if a lecture is given or a sermon is given on the coming of Imam Mahdi or Messiah, everything is dumped on the congregation. There's no like, this is right, everything is dumped and the person is sitting there like, wow, all this is going to happen?
Yeah.
Right? And it's because there's every school of thought's different. There's different Muslim groups, so I'm not going to generalize, right?
Yeah.
But how do you figure out what needs to be taken literally or taken figuratively? And who's to say? Who has the authority to say that this should be one way or another, right? So in our school of thought, what Mirza Ghulam Ahmad taught us is that the hierarchy of sources, you can say, is that the Holy Quran always comes first.
Mm-hmm.
It is, the word of God is immaculate, there's no doubt in it, and it trumps everything else.
Yeah.
Okay. Not all schools of thought will, everyone believes this, but practically when you go into the nitty gritty, you realize that sometimes they are using other sources over the Quran. The second source of knowledge or Islamic knowledge for us is the Sunnah. Sunnah means the practice of the Prophet. So what he did practically throughout his day, how he conducted himself, how he lived his life, what he would do, what he wouldn't do, how he interacted with people. These are things that he didn't necessarily have to say. But when you recognize him as your imam or your guide, then you look to him as an exemplar.
Yeah.
So you see him greeting people a certain way, you greet them a certain way. You see him praying a certain way, you pray the same way. And this is actually the most easiest way to learn Islam. And this is how kids learn it, right? They go to the mosque, they see their father praying, they just start copying him, right? And then as they grow and mature, they learn more and more and more. So that practical example is something that has carried forward right from the beginning. And it's never been taught in a meticulous way where you have someone lecturing you, right? Mm-hmm. It's always been, you see other Muslims doing it, so you do it. Because they saw other Muslims doing it, and they saw it, and they saw it. And it goes back straight to the Prophet, right? To the companions and then the Prophet. So that's the second source. Because it's so widespread, it's indisputable. Mm-hmm. Then the third source is Hadiths. And this is where it gets tricky because there's different collections of Hadiths. Yeah. And each collection has its own standard. Meaning, why did they include a Hadith? Why did they exclude a Hadith? And once you have those collections, then they go even further. Okay, but who said these Hadiths, right? Mm-hmm. Who narrated them? Who heard it from whom? And how far back does it go? Does it go to the Prophet? Does it just go to a companion? Is it related by multiple people? Is it related just by one person? Yeah. So these are sciences that developed much later. And it doesn't have that authority as the Quran, mm-hmm. right? It's a legitimate knowledge, it's very necessary, but it doesn't necessarily help you figure out problems. Because all you now know is how you got the information. You still need someone to sift through it or tell you, do this instead of this, or this applies in certain situations and this applies in other situations, or this doesn't apply to you at all at this point in time. Yeah. Right? So this is our strict understanding. So whenever there is a religious issue, we do follow these three sources in that order. So if we find that a hadith contradicts the Quran, we will disregard that hadith. Okay. This doesn't matter which book it's from. If it blatantly contradicts the Holy Quran, then it doesn't matter. And there's a fourth source as well, which is history of Islam, Tarikh or Sirat books. They're actually less than hadiths because they're derived from hadith books. Okay. So they've written these historical accounts based on the hadiths they found. So it's like an added step, right? So it's not really it's not authoritative in that sense. It's just an understanding of the Hadith and history. Different conclusions can be brought about different issues if you just look at the Hadith a different way. Right?
Yeah.
So Tariq is not really that significant in terms of the theology. Mainly it's the Holy Quran, Sunnah, and then the Hadith. Now in the Hadith you have different collections. And this is where we differ with other Muslims. And it becomes, because we have a grading that's slightly different than how they would look at Hadith, we draw different conclusions. Okay. So for example, the main issue is Imam Mahdi and Messiah, right? What's the primary source? The Holy Quran, right? So how do you see news of Imam Mahdi and Messiah in the Holy Quran? That's the first question. And generally, if you ask Sunni Muslims, they won't have an answer. They genuinely do not have verses that they can ground this truth into, this prophecy, this news that the Prophet gave us. And what I mean by ground, I mean like explicit verses, like where does it say Imam Mahdi is coming? Where does it say Messiah is coming, right? And generally they don't have an answer. So right away, there's an issue. Why don't they have an answer, right? If this is such an important issue, how come you cannot determine it from the Quran? And why is it that you can't do it, right? And is it the case that you can't do it and previously they could? Or is it that Muslims have never been able to do it, right? What we know is that the Holy Prophet ﷺ explained everything. He would give lectures upon lectures and the companions would absorb and absorb and absorb. But they weren't literate, right? They couldn't write down everything. There's a lot that has been lost in terms of his explanations. He would personally explain things to everybody, you know, and really mold them into the Muslims that they needed to be. Not everything could be written down. Not every explanation could be written down. So that's the first question. What is the foundation for this concept in the Quran?
Yeah. What
would that be?
The Ahmadi response to that.
So yeah, this is exactly it. So from our point of view, the knowledge of the Quran can only come from God. So if you need to know what the particularities of this issue are, and you don't know what the verses on the topic are, then you should be humble. Because this is what the Quran says: don't talk about things if you don't know about them. Don't adopt positions so firmly if you don't know the background.
Yeah.
There needs to be a bit of humility in Muslims and everybody in general about issues. No matter how much you've heard, if you can't explain it from the Quran, then just take a step back, right? And there's no harm in that. What's the worst that's going to happen? You'll have a better understanding of the Quran afterwards, right? Rather than being so rigid on something. Generally speaking, most Sunni Muslims or other Muslims ground their ideas or expectations about Imam Mahdi and Messiah in Hadith literature.
Okay.
That's what it is. We ground it in the Holy Quran. How do we ground it there? That's where Mirza Ghulam comes in. So he was told by God that Jesus, peace be upon him, has passed away, and that he himself is the fulfillment of the prophecies of a Messiah.
When would this have been started? When would he have started making those sort of statements?
So this was in 1889.
Okay.
Okay.
And this is what area of the globe?
This is Punjab, India area.
Okay.
In India, or Hindustan at that time, there was, this is before Pakistan.
Yeah.
There's a province called Punjab, and in there's a small little hamlet, small town called Qadian. That's where he lived and he was born and raised.
And he was raised as a Muslim?
Yeah, he was raised as a Sunni Muslim. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. His family was Muslim, a long line of Muslims. It's not that he became Muslim later, or the family. They've always been Muslim.
Okay.
The city was actually founded to be a hub for Islamic scholars. Back when his ancestors established the city, it was meant to be a place where scholars can discuss and things. So now, if you don't have a basis in the Holy Quran, and in the Hadiths, there's different ways to see Hadiths and different ways to grade them, then you're at a disadvantage, because then how do you know what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Now, with that in mind, the Quran does tell us to think about previous people and the problems they faced, and not to make their mistakes, not to repeat mistakes that other people have made, and not suffer the same way they suffered in the past. So one of the biggest lessons in the Holy Quran is that God is one. Okay, don't divert from that. Stick to Tawheed, which means expressing God to be one.
Yeah.
And don't waver on that. Now, what does Tawheed mean? There's a lot of depth in that we can go to as well. But secondly, when God sends you guidance, don't reject it. These are two main lessons that the Quran gives us. And it gives examples of previous people that when they rejected God's messengers and they came, how they suffered or what happened to them, or what their condition was before that led to God sending a messenger.
Yeah.
Right? Because God doesn't do things without reason or without cause. And when it comes to prophets or messengers, there's always a need before he sends them. So the Quran directs us towards those needs, which can help solve this problem, right? If you examine the verses of the Holy Quran and see, okay, God sent Noah, what was happening at Noah's time? God sent Moses, what was happening at Moses' time? God sent Jesus. So it helps you understand God's sunnah. This is something that's also in the Quran. Although there's a prophet's sunnah, his way of doing things, God also has a sunnah. Allah also has a way of doing things. And he doesn't break his sunnah. He doesn't change his ways. So if that's the case, then we have to be very critical of, or at least reflect upon the day and age that we live in. And is there a need for God to remanifest his attributes of sending a prophet or sending a messenger? And if he did it in the past, what makes us different? Why shouldn't we have that guidance when we're more divided than ever, right? We're at our throats more than ever. It's harder for us to come together. There's more inequality globally now than there ever was. Why can't we have that? Why can't we have that divine grace, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what question that comes to my mind is, if I'm not mistaken, some schools of thought think that the prophethood was closed after Muhammad, and there wouldn't be another prophet until basically the end times, when they believe that Jesus would return. So I guess, what is the Ahmadi perspective on that? Yeah,
that's exactly it. So now we're getting to expectations.
Yeah.
Right? So which is all from Hadiths. There is prophecies in the Quran about what will happen in the future, right? You'll see these things happen. You'll see there's a lot of prophecies about technological advancements and people coming together and books being spread abroad, and all of those indicate the time when God is going to re-manifest his attributes. But now the question that you've raised is very important too, that if the Holy Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet, then what are we waiting for, right? And this is the dilemma that Muslims need to figure out, that how can you simultaneously say someone is the last prophet but also expect another prophet after him? Which is what the case is with Jesus, peace be upon him. They expect Jesus to come back literally. Not all Muslims do. This is also very important to remember as well. There's no consensus on the life of Jesus in the Muslim world. There are some people that believe, some denominations or mazhabs that believe he has passed away a natural death. Others believe that he is ascended to the heavens and that he'll come back later. So you already have that division before Ahmadiyya enters the picture. Okay, so that's what needs to be recognized. And this is actually what's not being recognized today. This is put to the side. From the discussions that I've seen, it's becoming more of a minority-majority type thing. And Islam doesn't function like that. It's never functioned like that. What scholars will say today is, well, majority of Muslims believe he's in the heavens, so he's in the heavens. But that's not how Islam's ever functioned. It's always been, okay, what does this school of thought say? What does this school of thought say? It doesn't matter if they're a majority or just a single person. They're credible sources, right? So for example, most Hanafis, they believe that he has ascended to the heavens, but the Maliki school of thought believes he passed away. Right? So the issue of Jesus being alive or dead doesn't start with us. It's already existed in Islamic history. It's just that it's never been resolved. And that's where we come in the picture. Because according to the Sunnah of God, it was always a prophet that resolved disputes. And it's the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, peace be upon him, who resolved all the disputes of this people and united them on one front. So if it needs to happen again, it has to happen through the Prophet Muhammad. It has to happen through his book and by God's authority. So these are three things that have to come together. Now, let's take a step back. We already have the teachings of the Holy Quran. Why can't we just sit down and talk about it, right? What's so difficult? We have scholars who know verses in and out. We have scholars who memorize verses. They know grammatical analysis. They know the dictionary definitions and lexical definitions. They know traditional meanings. They know poetic meanings. They know everything.
Yeah.
But the division's still there. And what's stopping us from coming together, sitting at the table, and being firm that, okay, our opinions aside, let's focus on the book. Preferences aside, let's focus on what the book is saying. How hard could that be? Right? I mean, you already come together to pray, right? You go to Mecca to pray together. Why can't that next step be taken? It shows that there's a limitation of human endeavor. We can't do certain things. It's beyond us.
Okay.
You need an authority figure from God to resolve issues. And this is what the Quran says. It is meant to resolve disputes. It mentions specifically that it was sent down to resolve the disputes of the people of the book, meaning the Jews and Christians.
Yeah.
Right?
And, well, I guess I might be jumping the gun here, but Mirza Sahib, how do you know he was authentically who he said he was?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
You need a divine authority. And this is actually what has always happened. The Quran mentions that when people are divided, he sends someone to unite them.
Okay.
And what the Quran also mentions, which is very significant to our point of view, is that there's a promise in the Quran to protect the book and its teachings. God says that we have sent this book and we will protect it. Now, our interpretation of this, according to Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, is that it's not just about protecting the book, because although that's a huge achievement the Prophet Muhammad gave us, is this book of God's word, his other achievements are equally important, right? So the religion, you can have the book and not have the religion, right? You can have the book and no one follows it.
Yeah.
Right? That's a possibility. But it's never happened. There's always been adherence to the book.
Yeah.
So, and that's what Islam is, people who follow this book, right? And Muslims. So our point of view is that this promise to safeguard the book extends to Islam as a whole and the quality of Muslims as a whole, their spiritual state, right? It's impossible for God to start this initiative and then abandon it. Why put so much effort into it? Why put people through so much suffering for 23 years and then be like, okay, well, no, it's okay. Do whatever you want to do until the end times, right? So we see that as contrary to God's attributes of being provident and playing a role in our lives. So now what does this tie into, right? This ties into our needs. We have physical needs, we have emotional needs, and we have spiritual needs. And one of the principles that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad al-Islam told us is that if this is the book of God, it has to reflect the word of the actions of God, meaning that its teachings have to align with God's nature, the natural world that He's created.
Okay.
So, if you want to better understand what a teaching is, reflect on it in nature. And if you want to better understand nature, reflect on the Holy Book. Okay. So, for example, specifically on the issue of prophethood, right? We see that physically we need water to live, and God provides the water. You could try to start generating enough water for all of us. It's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
Especially on the timelines that we need it as a global, species now.
Yeah.
So, how does water happen? Where do we get it from? It evaporates and then comes down from clouds. There's a system in place, and He's maintaining that physical system despite our inequities and our sins and our transgressions and our divisions and our warfare and all that.
Yeah.
He's still maintaining all of us. Sinner, saint alike, everyone is being maintained. So this is one of the attributes that God presents in the Holy Quran, which Mirza Ghulam Ahmad has elaborated upon extensively, that God always takes care of the needs of creation. And if He's taking care of our physical needs, but then plans to condemn all of us, then that doesn't make any sense. Just just get rid of the physical needs. We'll all die out and that's it. End of story, right? So, but He's taking care of our physical needs. Food, we don't have to worry about too much. We don't worry about our blood cells. We don't worry about any of our cells. We don't worry about so many things that are just granted to us as gifts.
Yeah.
And He's in charge of that. He's maintaining that. So if He's putting so much effort into our physical, why wouldn't there be effort in our spiritual? Right? And that's where prophethood comes in. So if we need physical water, we need spiritual water to maintain this. And what happens when you have water? You're hydrated, you're lively, you're healthy, you're alive. So you need spiritual water for the exact same reasons. Now, now people would say at this point, well, we don't need revelation anymore because we have the Holy Book. It's complete. Why do we need any more revelation? And this isn't historically what Muslims have always believed. This is actually a very recent phenomenon. And it's actually directly in response to our movement, our growth. Historically, Muslims have not had an issue with revelation coming from God. There have been many saints who've claimed revelations. There's many saints in Islam who have made their own prophecies, right?
Okay.
So the issue of revelation, it's a scapegoat type of thing.
So if I understand you correctly, are you saying that the Quran, it can't be added to necessarily, like there won't be another book that comes, but someone could still make prophetic statements? Okay.
Absolutely, so now this is what it is.
Because I know, like from the Christian tradition, you would have something like Latter-day Saints who actually, Joseph Smith recreates an entire new book, and that's added on top of the Bible as of new revelation. But you wouldn't say that's possible.
Not at all.
So you're just saying that there can be prophetic, maybe oral traditions, but nothing to the extent of the Quran.
Or even non-prophetic.
Okay.
Because this is what it comes down to, our human nature. So we need guidance. We need information. We can't be satisfied unless we know something is true, right? Promises don't comfort us. You need to sometimes hear it from somebody that I'm there for you, right? Or see them in front of you that, okay, let's go, let's do this.
Yeah.
When you're in need, you could be desperate. Until there's something tangible, you're not going to be at ease. So if your religion doesn't bring you ease, then what good is it? This is the issue, right? And what's the purpose of praying if you're never going to get an answer, right? Not just in the sense that it happened, what you were asking for, but sometimes you need to know before it happens that, okay, I got you. I'm telling you that, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Okay. So that's also a form of revelation. It doesn't have to always be something that you hear auditory. It could be a thought put in your head, or a thought put in your heart, or a dream that you see where God comforts you. And this is actually a promise in the Holy Quran, that those who say our Lord is Allah, angels will come and give them glad tidings. They'll comfort them. They'll reassure them that don't worry, don't have any grief, don't have any anxiety. We are your friends. We'll take care of you. God is with you. This is a form of revelation, right? If angels are talking to you, they're not talking to you because of their own accord. In Islam, angels do what God tells them to do, and they can't do anything outside of that. So if God is promising that when you're in need, when you're in pain, when you have anxiety, and you trust in Him, He'll send some messages to you in whatever way or form you're capable of receiving them, then that's already a form of revelation, right? But that doesn't break the Quran. It doesn't break the need of the Quran. The Quran's guidance still applies. It's just that in that situation, in that moment, you need some powerful dose from God Himself, right? Directly.
I would, if a parallel, from a Christian perspective, a parallel would be kind of how some Christians perceive the Holy Spirit, where after you become a Christian and you accept the gospel message, the Holy Spirit indwells with you, and you can have prayer and communication with God, and as the Holy Spirit comforts you in your times of need and things like that.
Exactly.
It sounds like a similar concept to that.
Exactly. It's very similar. This is a human need. It cannot be removed from the earth. It's like, someone comes to visit you and they never come again, right? Why? If it's about a relationship, which is the context of a religion, right? A relationship with God, then you need to have that back and forth so that you know that He's always there. Because we are by nature forgetful. We can fall into error, doubt, everything if we're not firmly grounded. The early Muslims, they had the Prophet to ground them. And they went through so many things that made them realize that God exists. There's no doubt about it. And they also received revelation too, right? This is mentioned in Hadith literature. So the question isn't really about revelation. This is a modern day thing where, just to avoid the issue altogether, they say, well, prophethood in itself does have nuances. This is the other thing which doesn't get talked about much. By definition, a prophet is someone who receives information from God. Yeah. Okay. Does that mean they have an office? No. Right? Does that mean that they should go about saying that they're prophets? No. If in my time of need I get a revelation from God that tells me everything's going to be okay or that something will happen, and this happens in the Muslim community. There's lots of Muslims who see true dreams and they experience these things.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a deniable thing. It's just, I don't know, ignored or something for some reason. It's a reality throughout Islamic history. So, going back to it, if I get a revelation that, a certain matter that I'm praying for, I don't need to worry about it. If I see a dream about it, or if God tells me in my heart, should I go about and saying, look at me, I have a connection with God? Isn't that the opposite of having a relationship with God, where you're boastful and you're arrogant about it, right? So a devout Muslim would take that as a gift and be thankful about it and not mention it to people, unless he wants to impart some greater insight on somebody who's wanting to learn, right? Like a family member, right? So for example, if you're a devout religious person and you have this experience and you have a family member who's kind of doubting, wavering, that's the time you would share it with them in confidence, in private, and that's what it serves as, right? So Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, that's how his ministry started. He had, way before he made any claim to messiahship, he had many revelations, going back to 1865. Okay, one of the first revelations he received was at the instance of when his father passed away. When his father passed away, he wasn't. So Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, he wasn't a worldly person. He was more of a hermit.
Okay. He
stayed in the mosque. He read Islamic literature. He studied. He prayed. He was thankful. Like, he was not inclined towards any worldly thing at all.
Okay.
And his family was worried about him because, like, you have to work. You have to do things, right? His father was very worried about him. But their family was, his father was the chieftain of the town.
Okay.
So they were in charge of the town, and you can call them like nobles, basically, right? In India at that time.
I guess relatively wealthy then.
Not relatively wealthy, but they were, because it was still a small town. It wasn't like a metropolitan, right? Like, they had ancestral land and people rented and things like that. So because he was so devoted to his worship, he wasn't inclined towards worldliness. He didn't have income. He didn't have any of those things. So one of the first, when his father passed away, and his father was his main source of income. Okay. So this is way before, like, he was younger at that point, right? So in his mind, he had this fear, you could call it, or like, what am I going to do now, right? And actually, sorry, this isn't the first revelation. This is the second, I would say. When he had this thought, God revealed to him, "Alaysa Allahu bikafin abda," that is Allah not sufficient for his servant? So now you can see in this that there's nothing like, go do this, go do that. It's comforting. Like, don't worry. I've been taking care of you your whole life, and I'll continue to take care of you. This is the type of reassurance Islam promises. This is what keeps it alive. This is what makes it stand out, right? And this was his second revelation, I would say.
What will be the first then?
His first revelation was actually just before this. Prior to his father passing away, actually I want to make sure I get this right. It was his father or his mother? I believe it was when before his father passed away. He wasn't in the town. He was outside of town. His dad had gotten him a job, forced him to do a job, like, go work, right? So he was working in a different city, and he received the revelation, was samai wa tariq, which means like by the heavens and the star that sets. And immediately the understanding that he received was that my father's going to pass away. That was with that revelation came the understanding. And I believe this is what he mentions as his first revelation. Okay. So when he got this revelation, he went home. Right? This is before internet. This is before telephones and all that stuff. So he made his way back to Qadian, and then his father passed away. And then the second revelation he received is when he had this, what am I going to do now? Is God not sufficient for his servant?
Okay, yep.
And that's the message that is in the Quran as well. So all Muslims read this. It's supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to let us know that don't worry about things so much. Mm-hmm. If you believe in a God that's all powerful, why are you worrying about things, right?
How does a person like this, though, gather a following then?
So that comes much later.
Okay.
So this is why the history is very important, because people don't know that before claiming messiahship, he had already published his revelations. Okay, he had actually published them for more than 23 years.
Okay.
Right. So
when you say publish, what does that exactly mean?
Yeah. So in Islam, there's a criteria for truthfulness. Okay, in terms of your prophetic mission, if you have a prophet, if you're a prophet.
Yeah.
The way it's defined is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a truthful prophet, and his ministry lasted 23 years. Mm-hmm. If he's the definition of what a truthful prophet is, then no false person can have a longer ministry than him. So it's a logical thing. Okay? If a false person has a longer ministry than him, then how do you know who's true and false? Right? So there has to be a divine, I don't know what you want to call it, like intervention in the false person's life that would make sure that when you look at him and you look at a truthful prophet, you see, okay, this guy was definitely false. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe he didn't get the following, he didn't live long enough, he didn't. But 23 years is in Islamic literature known as the line of demarcation of what's truthful or not. So from 1865 to 1889, how many years is that?
23.
Right. So he's already past that. And this is when his ministry is starting. So what's happened from 65 to 89? This is the question. So he didn't, while he was always engaged in religious dialogue with people. You see people today, they're on YouTube and they're young and they're having religious conversations and stuff. He was having religious conversations when he was 16, 15, right? And this is before, like he was just having genuine conversations with Christians and Hindus and everything. When his father passed away, a few years later, he had the idea to respond to allegations that were coming upon Islam. This is a very difficult time for Muslims because there was a lot of, today we have a lot of Islamophobia. Back then there wasn't Islamophobia, but there was still a movement against Islam that was coming in from other countries.
Who was ruling that part of India at that time?
This was British India.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was missionaries coming in from Britain, from other lands, and they had the goal of converting India to Christianity. This was what was happening at that time, and many people were converting. Like hundreds and thousands of people were converting at the same time. And in the process of this, or the means to achieve this, was through literature, through speeches and talks. So what Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam saw was that there were priests that were coming into the country and printing books against Islam. And there was Hindus that were printing books against Islam. Mm-hmm. And they were using foul language. They were using very emotionally charged rhetoric. And it was effective because they were saying things that Muslims generally didn't hear, and they were spinning things in a way that made people question. And this is what he was seeing happening. So as a personal initiative, he started writing in favor of Islam.
Okay.
And this led to one of his books, which is called Farhan Ahmadiyya, the Ahmadiyya Arguments, which has no relation to the name of the movement.
Okay.
Because this started way before. 1889 is when his mission starts, but Farhan Ahmadiyya is written, I believe, 1880, right? Ahmadiyya, in that sense, it's a term that means beautiful, okay, like a very pleasant thing. So he started writing this book, and back then it wasn't that there There's no publishing houses like this what we have today. You have to get sponsors. You have to get people to support your venture. So his first and second revelation were revolved around his father's passing. And you can imagine from that doesn't tell you to do anything, right? It's more of consoling you and bringing you peace. And this happened in 1876.
Mm-hmm.
Right? June 1876 is when his father passed away, and a day before he was told by God that this is going to happen, just to let it settle in. And then when he passed, he received another revelation to console him and don't worry about the future. God is going to take care of you. Now, while this is happening, he's also, we were talking about how he's engaged with other groups, and he's discussing religion with groups, and the state of Muslims was that they were being targeted by missionaries from other religions, from clergy from other religions. Hindus and Christians were kind of going at it, mm-hmm. discussing different things. And that was just the atmosphere that was happening. But there's a third factor there as well, which doesn't get talked about much, but which was the enlightenment that was happening within the country. People were now, because of the British rule, had access to higher education. So they were studying, they were getting masters and PhDs, and they were getting influenced by philosophy a lot. Mm-hmm. And that was also taking a lot of Muslims away from Islam. So when he saw this, and in his mind, Islam was the perfect religion. It had answers, and it was actually very troubling to see Muslims leaving the religion, mm-hmm. and leaving on really shaky or baseless foundations. Like, it wasn't a good reason to leave, right? If you have a philosophical conflict, resolve it. If there's an attack on your beliefs or principles, look at it deeper. Does it actually stand up, right? And then obviously leaving because someone insults the religion, or because it's made to look really inferior. That's not basic. Like, you should have that in-depth knowledge, but the Muslims weren't getting that information from the scholars. Mm-hmm. The scholars at that time, the imams at that time, of course not all of them, but the majority of them were not trying to tackle this issue. It wasn't a problem that, okay, these Muslims are leaving Islam, but for him it was a problem. And because he had spent a lot of time studying the Holy Quran, a point came where he started answering questions that people were asking. So it started off with the Hindus, the Arya Samaj, Arya Samaj and Brahmo. He started answering their allegations. He started having one-on-one debates with them, correspondence with them, and he would print posters and put them up, answering these questions. And this is significant. He didn't just jump in, okay, I'm the Messiah, I'm answering questions. There's a build-up happening. Yeah. And he's just going with the flow. There's no real direction in this, right? It's just, okay, this is the issue now, tomorrow this is the issue. So he doesn't tackle Christianity till later. Mm-hmm. He tackles philosophy, he tackles the Hindu religion, and this is what we see in his first book, Farhan Naseer. We were talking about this earlier, mm-hmm. which has 5 parts. Part 1 and 2 came out in 1880. And if you read these books, you can tell, oh yeah, we were talking about getting support for books. Yeah. Right? As an author, if he wants to print and he doesn't have money, he has to solicit funds from people. So Volume 1 is basically appealing to people who have concern for the state of Islam, have compassion for Muslims, that I'm writing this book to defend Islam, to clarify these allegations that are put against Islamic teachings, and I would like you to support me in this venture. So he's getting subscribers, basically. Yeah. Basically, right? Or Patreon type thing. And many Muslims supported him. They said, okay, we're going to give you this much money for this many copies. And that's when you can actually go to a publishing or a printer and say, okay, I want X number, because you have the money to back it up. So he prints volume 1 and 2. And in these volumes, the interesting thing here is his argument is that Islam is a living religion. And the proof of its being a living religion is that God still talks to Muslims. And that's what makes it stand out against other religions. And then to furnish proof for that, or to provide proof, he gives his own revelations, pages and pages upon his own personal revelations that he hasn't shared with anybody before. Just in his diary, he wrote them down as he received them. But he presents them now as, okay, this is what Islam gives a person access to. This is the type of information you now, if you have a relationship with God and he's a living God, this is how you know what's, this is, how can you say, like a gift that you have. And it makes Islam stand out. So this is before anything. This is before Ahmadiyya as a movement. This is before his messiahship. This is before he started a community. Mm-hmm. This is before any of his claims. But there was no backlash. And that's surprising, because if today the traditional stance is that there's no more revelation, then there should have been backlash immediately when he published volume 1 and 2. So what does that show? There's been a stance change. They've moved the goalposts. As things progress, they eventually moved the goalposts. When he published volume 1 and 2, there were still Muslims supporting him, which allowed him to publish volume 3. Mm-hmm. If his stance that revelation continues was a problem, it would have been a problem before, long before he claimed anything. So this is very striking, because from a historical point of view, you can't ignore this fact. He wasn't talking to the average Muslim. These books are scholarly books. He was talking to the philosophers. He was talking to the scholars, the imams, using the ideas prevalent at that time to show how Islam does not fall into these traps. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he's talking to the average person. He's talking to learned Muslims, and they're not, except for a few voices that said you shouldn't publish your revelations. No one said, what the heck is this? There's no revelation in Islam, right? The Prophet is the last prophet. Where are you coming up with this stuff? That didn't happen. And this is years before he made a claim. So today, for that to be the stance that there's no more revelation, therefore Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is wrong, it can't work. That's literally changing the goalposts, right? So now, a point comes when he makes the claim to be the mujaddid of Islam. Now this is a very important thing to understand. We talked about earlier how the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ warned Muslims of what will happen in the future, and the state that they will fall into, and the troubles that they will face. This is exactly where this concept of mujaddid, or reformer, comes in. The Prophet of Islam ﷺ told Muslims that the first 3 generations of Muslims are the best. Okay? Then you will see a crooked generation, meaning that they'll be irreligious. Mm-hmm. And then God will reestablish truth. So, how does he describe this crooked generation? Well, basically, what it means is that they won't be following Islam properly, and they'll introduce innovations into the faith. The first 3 generations will have the best understanding, and the last generation will have the best understanding. And how does the last generation get it? It's because God intervenes to start the community afresh again. So now, what we say to our Sunni brothers and sisters is that if we have a dispute on issues of doctrine, then let's compare the beliefs, not with what happened in the last 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, 400, 500 years. Let's compare our beliefs with what happened in the first 3 centuries. Who lines up with their beliefs more, right? So now I'm going to tie it all back, okay? Okay. Because we talked about Hadiths, and that was collected early on. So, and we talked about how when the topic of Messiah and Mahdi comes up, everything is dumped on Muslims. I was talking to a Sunni brother the other day, and he said, it's like magic. The description that they give us of what's going to happen is like magic. It's like fantasy, right? How do you wrap your head around that? And that's literally it, because they'll narrate everything, and then at the end they just leave it like that. There's no definite answer, right? So in terms of Imam Mahdi, there's scores of hadiths on this topic. But in our reasoning, or our method of thought, Quran, Sunnah, Hadiths, when you get to the hadith part and you see all these hadiths, many of them which are contradictory, many of them
they compete against each other in their descriptions of the return?
In their description of the return or what to expect, right? We say that.
Do you have an example when you say contradictory?
Yeah, so like some will say that he'll be coming from one part of the earth. Some will say he'll come from another part of the earth.
Okay.
Right. Well, it's like you can't have everything happening at the same time. How do you sift through it? If the book that we have, the Holy Quran, is meant to be a furqan, in Arabic it's described itself as a furqan, which means it discriminates what's right and wrong. It tells you what's true and false. So why don't we use it to analyze the hadiths and see what's true and false, right? That doesn't happen because it's not their place to do it. They're transferring knowledge. They're not meant to put any of their own input into it. Mm-hmm. So interestingly, within the hadith collections, you have Bukhari, you have Sahih Muslim, you have Ibn Majah, Tirmizi. Mm-hmm. We have a ranking for them. Okay.
That doesn't exist in other schools?
It may exist in some. I wouldn't say categorically, but it is pretty unique to us.
Okay.
In the practical sense. Generally speaking, Sahih Bukhari is considered the most authentic book.
Yeah.
What we say is, it is the most authentic book after the Holy Quran, and it should be consulted when looking at other hadith books.
Okay.
So if there's a hadith in Muslim or Tirmizi or Ibn Majah, compare it to Bukhari. Does Bukhari support that hadith? If Bukhari doesn't support that hadith, then I reject it.
When you say doesn't support, do you mean contradicts or just doesn't have anything in it about that topic?
Both.
Okay.
Because Imam Bukhari, he didn't just put things together. There was a thought process behind it. There was a lot of prayers behind it. And he went into each hadith in detail. And he even organized them so that you understand the belief that you're supposed to derive from the hadith.
So what could you garner from looking at the other hadith then if everything in the Sahih Bukhari, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
If everything in there, if that's like the core of the hadith tradition, what purpose does the other hadith serve if they have anything that's just not in there, that just tossing it out like?
Yeah, so we're not in favor of tossing out hadiths.
Okay.
Unless they contradict Quran.
Okay.
And even then we'll be like, our approach is that out of respect for the Prophet and respect for that we only have those words, we don't have the whole context, right? What was happening that day and everything. If there's a way to interpret the hadith that makes it fit with the Quran, we'll do that instead. We'd rather not toss it out, but if it contradicts the Quran, both literally and metaphorically, then let's just let it go. There's no point. And there's no need for it at all. Mm-hmm. So now, in terms of the hadiths regarding Imam Mahdi, Bukhari doesn't mention any of them. And this is a very significant point. He's collecting hadiths that are available, and he's ignoring all the ones about Imam Mahdi. This shows us that he made a judgment call that those hadiths are not reliable, they're contradictory, I cannot put them in my collection because they won't guide people. They'll just create more confusion. So he doesn't mention any hadiths about Imam Mahdi in his book, while others do, because they had their own criteria. Every collector had their own criteria, right? But in his strict criteria, and his collection, which is considered the most authentic collection, he does not mention Imam Mahdi, right? Which means that his thought process on that concept was different than other people. What does he do mention? He does mention the Messiah, right? So that means he does agree with the hadith regarding Messiah, but the way the Imam Mahdi concept evolved, there was no way he could include that. So we take that as a very significant point that you have to give this a lot of consideration. If Imam Bukhari, who's considered the top-notch scholar in hadith and his collection is the most authentic, why would he exclude these hadiths? Not even one hadith, right? But what does he mention? He mentions the Messiah coming. And what does he say? There's a hadith that he quotes which settles the whole matter. Usually when it's said that we use weaker hadiths, or we use hadiths that are from other less authentic books, but we actually quote Bukhari on this issue. There's a hadith in Bukhari that says, what will your condition be when Jesus comes, right? And he will be your imam from among you. So for us, that is a black and white hadith, meaning that there will be a Messiah figure for us, but he's our imam from among us, not from outside, not from the sky, right?
How do other schools interpret that?
This is the question. How do they interpret? We don't get this far in the conversation. This is the problem. There's a lot of discourse that we never get to because there's assumptions happening. And like I said, that change in the goalposts has really helped with that, because it eliminates a lot of the discussion that needs to happen. It's convenient. There's a lot of scholars who want to have genuine conversations in good faith, but this just hinders the whole process. So that's one hadith in say Bukhari, that what will your condition be when Jesus comes and he will be your imam from among you. For our point of view, that's very clear. If there's supposed to be a Messiah figure, he's going to be from among the Muslims, from among you. That's literally right there, right? And he's your imam. So the Messiah and the Imam Mahdi are the same person, right? Now, there is another hadith we quote which collaborates this hadith, which is that there is no Jesus except the Mahdi. So, meaning that don't expect two different people. The Messiah and the Mahdi are the same person. That's a supporting hadith we use, but the main one we use is Bukhari, right? They tend to usually focus on the other one, but our main point is Bukhari. Now, why is this Bukhari? Now, like I said, does the Quran, we go from Quran, Sunnah to Hadith. Does this hadith in, say, Bukhari fit the Quran? That's the question now. Bukhari's mentioned it, that there's no Messiah except the Messiah will be your imam from among you. Does the Quran support this idea? This is the question now. Now, we talked about this earlier. Sunni Muslims usually do not have any verse to quote on Jesus' life after his ascension, quote unquote. There's no mention of him coming back to earth. There's no mention of him leading the Muslims. There's no mention of his mission at all afterwards.
In the Quran.
In the Quran. We know what the Quran says about his life on earth 2,000 years ago or so.
Yep.
But if the expectation is for him to come back, then the best way to make sure that this book is seen as a source of truth is mention what's going to happen in the future, right? But it's not there in the words that they want, right? And this is where we point out to them that let's not make the same mistakes our other brothers and sisters in faith made before, where they expected literal things to happen and God wanted them to be figurative. Our Israelite brothers, our Jewish brothers have made the same mistake from our point of view with regards to their Messiah. They wanted a warrior figure who was going to unite them, and they got a meek Jesus who was promoting a spiritual kingdom, right? So this is what we're trying to point out, that we can't make the same mistakes, otherwise there's no point in having the book. That means we're not learning any lessons from it. Mm-hmm. And our expectations should line up with the book. And if you don't have a conclusive verse to prove that there should be a Messiah, then you shouldn't even talk about the issue. If we say we have a conclusive verse, then you should come to us and ask us what those verses are, right? Because we're making the claim. So the onus is on us. We're not just throwing it out there in a vacuum. And when Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was alive, this is what he told people. This is my claim. If you want to inquire about it, he's already printing books at this point. Yeah. This is later on. So 1890 is when he made his claim to messiahship. And he thoroughly goes through all the details, right? Some people don't even bother buying the books. Some people don't even bother buying the books. Some people don't bother reading them, but they already start giving their fatwas. And this is the crucial thing now. Today, Ahmadi Muslims are considered non-Muslims due to, or the premise of that fatwa is our belief in prophethood.
Yeah.
Historically, that's not the case. I already showed that he's printed revelations way before he made claims. So it's not about prophethood. It's not about revelations. The first fatwa against us was actually because Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Islam announced that Jesus has died. And this is when the first fatwa came against us. That's the only real fatwa against us. Everything else they build after that is just, build up. So that's the crux of the matter. Is he alive or is he dead? We say that the Quran does not support him being alive, and it doesn't mention anything about him coming in the future, literally, or doing everything that you expect. We do it.
Can I understand correctly
please.
of like how you understand that Jesus would have died then on the cross, or die? I say cross from a Christian perspective.
Yeah.
But I would have died during his execution. He wouldn't have raised up or been appeared to.
Yeah, so this is a this is the entire thing. Right?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious the details then, what that looks like from the Ahmadi perspective.
From our point of view, Jesus was a true prophet of God and a true Messiah. And the Jews at that time wanted to kill him with an accursed death, meaning that through the death on the cross, they wanted to show that he was a false figure. And we don't see it possible that God would allow him to die an accursed death, him being a true prophet of God. So our perspective is they tried as much as they could to kill him, but God is in control and he saved him. We do believe that he was put on the cross, but we do not believe he died on the cross.
Okay.
And we have a whole line of argumentation on this.
Okay.
It's just as long as the conversation.
But then the statement that he has died, does that mean he died from other causes then?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So we see him, the Quran mentions him as a messenger to the children of Israel. I'll go into it briefly, but this is a very involved conversation. At the time when Jesus was alive, there was only 2 or 3 tribes living in the land of Judea. And he's the Messiah for all the Israelites. So the Quran mentions he has to teach all the children of Israel. And if the first 2 or 3 that he approached made it very difficult for him, right? Extremely difficult for him.
Yeah.
To the extent that they wanted to kill him, he still has a responsibility to the other tribes, a God-given responsibility. So our perspective is that when they rejected him and took it to the extreme, God saved him and then guided him how to meet the other tribes.
Okay.
And this is actually mentioned in the Quran that Allah says that we gave him and his mother refuge on an elevated land of green valleys and running water. And this is significant. Many people, where is this green land? Where is this running water? Where did he go? Right? That's a question that has to be answered. And the current theology doesn't answer that question. If he went to the heavens, then there's no green land or running water there. So what's the answer to that? Sunnis, Muslims have to provide an answer to that. Some people say it means some place in Iraq or some other, but it doesn't fit the description. Some people say it means heaven, because heaven is also described as having fountains and these type of things.
Where did the concept of ascended come from as well?
Yeah, so our perspective is that this creeped into Muslims later on. Remember I mentioned there's the first 300 years and then so a point came when Islam was spreading too rapidly. And there wasn't enough time to correct people's beliefs and train them on what Islam was teaching as opposed to what they believed before. So our understanding is that when certain Christian groups became Muslims, they brought this with them.
Okay.
Because this was a Christian belief before, right?
Because of the Christian belief of the resurrection.
Ascension and resurrection, right? So resurrection gets handled by Islam because it doesn't say, but the ascension part they brought in with them.
Yeah.
Because there's always that need to know what happened next, right? And they already had that answer, and it just somehow became a mainstream. But theologically, from the Holy Quran, there's no foundation for it. So that's a little segue. We went to that side, right? But it's important to know, and I actually have a whole presentation on this that I do. We can do that some other time, maybe.
Yeah, because I knew, and I read through the Quran once. I don't read it regularly, but I do know that when this topic of the Jesus, especially his death, his ascension, all these things, a lot of times people will go to the passage where you tried to kill him, but you, in reference to the Jews, that whole passage, it appeared to you that he died, but he didn't. Type.
Yeah.
I know that's brought up a lot when this conversation comes around and how people interpret all that part of it.
Well, that's exactly like, let's have the conversations. That's what it comes down to, right? And not be crafty about it. This is what I've seen. There's a lot of tricks involved. There's a lot of diversions or guided conversations rather than hitting the nail on the head. That's not really good faith, right? That's more like, I'm just going to prove you wrong. Prove me wrong. I'm trying to follow the Quran. Right? I don't mind. But let's not divert from our established method of Islamic theology, right? And that's what ends up happening with this particular issue. Other things, they'll handle it in a totally sophisticated way. This Imam said this, but when it comes to our bones of contention, that sauce you don't put that sauce on there, right? So, yeah, for us, it's very clear that he died a natural death. And because earlier we spoke about there's two concepts that a prophet has to teach, there's two concepts that the Quran mainly focuses on, which is the oneness of God, the Tawheed, and believe in prophets, right? That implies that there has to be you can't make humans more than they are. So in this case, there's no support for the notion at all of him being alive today or him coming back, according to their understanding. The notion of there being a Messiah figure in Islam, that's there. That's something that we answer, and we can go into that next probably, because that's really what it comes down to. If, let's say, we had no Hadith literature, how would you show that Islam is supposed to have a Messiah, right? And actually, there's some scholars who have been disturbed or not have trouble with this question, and because of not being able to find an answer, they rejected the Messiah concept altogether now as well.
Oh, really?
There's some scholars that have gone that far that because we can't resolve it from the Quran, it must be a totally what's the word? It must totally come from outside, right? Outside influence. So now, how do we actually rectify this problem? People who went to meet Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Islam, he answered it for them, and we have it in our literature, like the discourses that he had. And in the books that he published to answer this question, he went into a lot of detail as well. And it comes down to one verse in the Holy Quran, or two actually, but one of them is more significant or more detailed. It says that Allah has promised the believers that He will raise successors among them as He raised successors among those before them. Okay? This is what we highlight, that Allah is, He's making you think about His sunnah. And He's telling you a promise that He's making with you as Muslims. So now, this brings the whole Quran into the context. Okay, He's telling us about a promise that He's making with us, and He's going to treat us the way He treated other people before us. Who are those other people that came before us? Well, the first people you would think about is the children of Israel. They're the most like Muslims. So, what's the relationship? How is it that we have successors like they had successors? Our explanation for this is that the children of Israel, their religion, you can say, although they had Abraham and they had Noah and all these, it really started with Moses, right? It really comes down to Moses initiating things for them, bringing a law and taking them out of bondage and all these things. So he is their law-bearing prophet. Mm-hmm. And in parallel to that, Muslims have the Holy Prophet Muhammad as their law-bearing prophet.
Yeah.
So that's the first parallel. Then you see that in the children of Israel, you had a succession of prophets coming after Moses at different times. Eventually, that leads to a Messiah figure among them. So, although we know that there's no need for new doctrine in Islam, so there's no need for a prophet to come every so often, but where's our Messiah figure? This is where it comes in. The promise is there that you're going to have what the children of Israel had. Not exactly, but in principle, right? The broader strokes, let's say, right? They had a law-bearing prophet and a law, and then they had a decline, and then they had a Messiah. You have a law-bearing prophet and a law, and you're going through your decline, and so where's your Messiah? That's where the promise is. So there must be a Messiah figure for us, otherwise we don't resemble our nearest neighbor, right? Now, the verse also says that the person will come from among you. He has promised to those who believe among you that he will raise successors among you. So we shouldn't be looking outside. We shouldn't be looking outside, like outwardly either. His practice has always been to raise someone from within the community. The prophets that came to the children of Israel came from within them. No one ever came from the sky. So we should also not expect someone to come from the sky, but when the time is right, someone will come from within us. And this is what Imam Bukhari's Hadith says as well. So there's a direct correlation. It works. There's no contradiction there. And that in itself is significant. We can go into more detail about that promise, and it's very detailed, but that in itself is the basis. We should have a Messiah because they had a Messiah.
Okay.
Right? And it's black and white. And now, because in Islam, the Quran is the foundation for all knowledge. So if this is the case, then you can see why there are prophecies of a Messiah coming, because this is the foundation for it. Then there's also the comparison of the timeline. If you look at when Jesus came after Moses, Mirza Ghulam came the same time after Muhammad.
So I guess this plays into then partly how you would go about trying to prove why he is the return of the Messiah.
Yeah. The first thing it comes down to is the need. Is there a need for Muslims to be united again? Yes, there is. Is there a need for them to come back to faith? Yes, there is. Is there a need? Are they under attack today? Yes, they are. Right? All of the descriptions of why a prophet needs to be sent are there. Now, what kind of prophet is Mirza Ghulam? This is the question. And our explanation for this is that the Holy Prophet ﷺ brought the last law. There's no need for any more law. So that type of revelation, that sort of revelation, it's cut off. There's no more. But humans still need guidance. They still need comfort. So the revelation that brings people comfort and guidance is still open. Not everybody can be a leader though, right? So that particular revelation that a leader needs, or that is still open, but not for everybody, for whoever God wants to appoint. Mm-hmm. And that's his choice. We have no say in the matter. It could be anyone from anywhere, as long as they fit the bill, right? Now, there's still a difference here, because these are the nuances that never get spoken about. All the prophets before the Holy Prophet Muhammad, we consider them independent prophets. They were told they're prophets, so they were prophets. Okay. It's not because they did anything spectacular, or they followed somebody and they got that rank to lead. Moses was given it, Abraham was given it, Jesus was given, like from our point of view, right? Yeah. They were all just given, and it was independent. They didn't have to rely on each other either, even as contemporaries. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was also given it, so he's also an independent prophet. But the Quran promises that those who follow this prophet, meaning Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they act upon his teachings, there is a door still open for them. And these are called blessings that are mentioned right in Surah Fatiha, the first chapter of the Holy Quran. Yeah. We say, guide us on the right path, Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim, the path of those whom you have blessed, not the path of those who incurred your displeasure or wrath, and not the path of those who went astray. Yeah. So what does it mean to be favored, to be blessed, is the question now. What are we asking for in this prayer? It's very generic, right? I mean, that can mean anything. The Quran goes into detail. It mentions that those who follow this Prophet, meaning Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and do good works, they will have those favors which other groups had. They will be among the prophets, they will be among the righteous, they will be among the martyrs, right? So these are the gifts that we can expect as Muslims, and prophethood is mentioned among them. But now, prophethood in what sense, in what nuance? It's not independent prophethood that we're expecting. It's not true prophethood in the sense of the Holy Prophet, bringing a complete law. All the previous prophets, they were independent, but they didn't bring a complete law. So he was independent and he brought a complete law, which makes him a perfect prophet, a true prophet in our eyes. So that door is closed. But people still need guidance. So that door is open. Which just means that when Allah needs to unite us again, He will not abandon us at that time, saying that, no, you're done. Right? It's not a true prophethood in the sense that He has a law. It's not independent prophethood either, because it's dependent on following the Holy Prophet.
So is it possible, in a theoretical sense within your tradition, that another prophet of that sort could come again, or is that just being carried now through the caliphs?
Theoretically, it's possible. In terms of expectations, there's no expectation mentioned.
Yeah, but in theory, if there would be another, either falling away or something, however you want to describe it, it would be possible for another.
So this is where the caliph comes in.
Yeah,
because he's also part of that initial promise.
Okay.
So Moses comes, and then he has caliphs, Aaron, and so on. Muhammad ﷺ comes, and he has caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, and so on. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad comes, Islam, and he also has caliphs now. Nuruddin, Mirza Bashir. These are his caliphs now. And that's the reality. You need the caliphate to keep the faith alive. That's what keeps the Muslims united, and that's what keeps them on point in terms of the mission that they signed up for originally. And this is a significant point that it's not talked about enough. It's not enough just to do the shahada. In Islam, shahada means that you've now accepted the faith and you've declared that without a doubt, you testify that God is Allah and there's nobody else, and that Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is his messenger. That's your testimony, not just a declaration of sorts, right? It's you're testifying. So it's like there's no blind faith in Islam. So you've made that conclusion and now you're declaring it.
Yeah.
But that's not enough. Someone can determine that, be living away from the Muslims, right? And not be part of the Muslim community, not know the leadership, not know the caliph, not know anybody. So their Islam is still deficient. What the Holy Quran mentions is, after you submit, you have to pledge allegiance to the Prophet. Okay? And this is what was done historically. It wasn't that, okay, you're a prophet, great, I'm walking away. No, he's a prophet. You're sticking with him. You're going to do what he says. So you pledge allegiance to the Prophet. This happened in early Islam. This is what happened in the first 3 generations. And that's why they were able to unite, and that's why they were able to have all the victories that they did, because they were one body. Right now, what you have in the Muslim world is people accepting Islam, but they're not one body, because they don't have one person to pledge allegiance to. So the caliph, the khalifa, that's who that person is that you have to pledge allegiance to. And how do we get to Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the current khalifa? In Islam, there's prophecies that Allah will send guidance every 100 years, okay, to reform the Muslims. He will send a reformer, actually, to reform the Muslims every 100 years. And that's the chain that resembles the prophets that came after Moses.
Is this mentioned in the Quran or
Hadith?
Hadith,
yeah. It's not disputed though. So you have these figures. They're not necessarily claiming revelation, but they're like voicing concerns about current beliefs that are happening within their generation, and they're trying to rectify it. And this is more like medicine. right? The Muslim community is growing, and then they're stumbling here and there, and then every 100 years God sends some guidance to keep them on track. And the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned that a person who dies without recognizing the Imam of their age, the person who's meant to guide them in that generation, has died the death of ignorance, right? And ignorance is basically before Islam. That's what we call ignorance. The era of ignorance is before the Prophet, before his guidance, before his light. So if you don't accept the Imam of the age or pledge allegiance to the Imam of the age, then you may be a Muslim, but it's as if you're an ignorant Muslim in Allah's eyes, which is significant. So you have multiple prophecies overlapping each other now. You have prophecies about Imam Mahdi, Messiah, Mujaddideen, or reformers. And the consensus is that there is a fixed time when the Messiah is supposed to come. Okay? And that's the time when Mirza Ghulam Ahmad made his claim.
Okay.
Right? So he fit the bill in terms of time, right? So if that time passes, for you to look for another Messiah, it's ignorance. Because sunrise is going to happen when it's supposed to happen. If you're waiting for it at noon, it's not going to happen. It's already happened. You missed it.
And so how did you know it would be that time period, specifically late 1800s?
Yeah, so this is in our Hadith literature. This is, there's a consensus of scholars on this, that it will happen in the 13th century of Islam, right?
So even Sunnis?
Yeah, even Sunnis, yeah.
So what do they say then if they believe that the Messiah hasn't come yet?
That's the question. What are you waiting for? They know that all the signs have been fulfilled. Okay, there's major signs of the latter days, minor signs of the latter days. They know all of these have been fulfilled. And they actually say it openly. You can see lots of YouTube videos on this. But making the connection that, okay, if the signs are fulfilled, then maybe we shouldn't be waiting anymore. We should be looking like what happened. But because the option of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad has been written off due to various reasons, political and otherwise, they're just wandering around, right? And
well, I guess, within Ahmadi school of thought, is there still a concept of the end of the world judgment day type thing? Or is that not exist?
No, it does exist.
Okay, because I know with a Sunni I've spoken with before, a lot of times the coming of the Messiah or Jesus is not conflated, but has a really close relationship with the end days. So I didn't know how that then, if Messiah has already come in Ahmadi school of thought, how that then correlates to the end days.
Yeah, so that comes down to literal interpretation.
Okay, because I know that in some of the stuff I've seen, it's like within when Jesus returns and this many years will pass. And
yeah, so they're expecting like boom, 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 boom.
Yes, like it's basically like within a few years, boom, everything happens.
Exactly, and that's not according to the Sunnah of Allah. I've never seen that happen in the past, right? And to make someone wait 2,000x years to come back for 40 years, what is happening? From our point of view, right? So in a sense, our understanding is more literal than theirs, because we see in the Quran Allah saying that He will send us successors from among us. That's literal. You can't, if you take that figuratively, then it's like, okay, it means from the sky, right? So in that sense, our interpretation is literal. There's another verse in the Holy Quran where it mentions there's another verse in the Holy Quran where Allah says that He has sent a messenger to you among the unlettered people, and He teaches them the book, He teaches them wisdom, and He purifies them. And He will also send him again to another people who have not joined this first group. So the Quran is talking about a second coming, but it's only talking about the second coming of Muhammad. Right? It clearly mentions that he's been sent to the Ummi or the unlettered people, and that he'll be sent to another people. And when this verse was revealed, the companions understood that, okay, he's not coming back. Like if he passes away, he's not coming back, literally. So that wasn't the question that they asked. They asked him, and this is in Bukhari, they asked him, who are those other people that you're going to come to? Right? Who are they, O Messenger of Allah? And the Prophet's practice was that he didn't just speak. He spoke when he was told to speak and when he had information to share. So they asked him 3 times, who are those people that you're going to come to? And after they asked him 3 times, he put his hand on one of his companions, who was named Salman al-Farsi, and said that if faith was to leave the earth and go to the Pleiades, the highest of stars, somebody from this man's people will bring it back for you. Okay? So with this interpretation, or this understanding, I shouldn't say interpretation because this is what he was told to say. With this understanding, we know that the second coming of Muhammad is not meant to be him himself. It's going to be somebody else. It's not going to be someone coming from the sky. It's going to be from the lineage of this person or the nation of this person. Which are the main disputes between us and Sunni Muslims. Is it someone literally coming back, or is he coming back from the sky, right? So this verse also resolves that issue and tells us what to expect. And in terms of Muslims, it clearly says your faith will be lifted off the earth. Like you're going to lose your faith, right? You're going to lose your religion, and you're going to need someone to bring it back to you. Now, can scholars do the job? Right? They're educated, they know the stuff inside and out. Can't they do the job? Why is it that we need a new person to lead us? Well, there's 2 parts to this. First of all, if God's saying he's going to send you someone to guide you, like be grateful. Like that's not something you should fight. Right? We all need someone to guide us. And if God's saying he promises to guide us, bring it, please. Because no human's going to be able to do it. Like if you look at the world today, scientists can't do anything for us. Philosophers can't do anything for us. Politicians can't do anything for us. All of them are dividing us, right? It's not going to happen on its own. It has to be God intervening, just as he always did. So what we say is it's a gift, someone coming from God, prophethood, the nuanced sense of someone who is told to guide people. It's a gift. It doesn't take away anything from the Holy Prophet. It's as if he had a spiritual son, right?
Okay.
It doesn't take anything away from him. It doesn't lessen his rank. It doesn't harm his mission. In fact, it fulfills his mission. It's the exact fulfillment of what he wanted, right? Because he's obviously human. He can't live forever. So if he has to guide another nation, you can't dig him up and bring him back to life. So that's what it is. We see divine intervention or divine guidance as a blessing, as a mercy. Because we don't know things naturally. Right? When we're born, we know absolutely nothing. We need to be told, do this, do that, don't do this, right? And then slowly we learn things and we mold our lives, but we still have questions. And like I said, Islam doesn't believe in blind faith. So there has to be concrete proof all the time. And I already spoke about Islam, Allah promising to protect Islam, protect the Quran, which means that he has to keep it alive. He has to keep it watered and fresh, right? So that it always bears fruit. And that's what revelation is. When a person's purified, their heart is purified, then revelation can descend upon it. So either God never purifies anybody anymore, so they're incapable of revelation, or they're capable, but he's depriving them. And both are not options. It's against the sanctity of God. You can't have an image of God like that where, like, what do you call that, right? Withholding a blessing from your creation? That's not love, that's not mercy, right? Especially when you see that we're not doing it on our own, right? So this is what we point out to them, or we try to point out, but usually the conversation doesn't go that far. I mean, it's been, like I said, the first fatwa against us was about Jesus dying. It wasn't even about revelation, right? In fact, after that fatwa against Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, people published their own revelations Muslim scholars were publishing their own revelations that I received a revelation that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is false. It's not about revelation. That's just a distraction. It has nothing to do with the issue. And it's not about prophethood, because we don't claim him to be a prophet replacing the Holy Prophet. Yes, you only pledge allegiance to prophets and successors. So whoever comes has to be told he's a prophet by God. And the revelations that he printed in Brahini Anbiya Part 1 and 2 contained revelations that he is referred to as a messenger or a prophet. And we don't take that in the literal. We say that, if God names somebody or gives someone a title, then that's God's prerogative. It doesn't mean more than that, right? So sometimes the assumption is we're replacing the Holy Prophet. No, we love him more than anything. We'd die for him. But Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was just a perfect resemblance of that prophethood, because whatever, we call him a reflection or a shadow of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, meaning that if the Prophet ﷺ is the sun, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is the moon, right? And the moon is brightest in the middle of the month, so he's the full moon. In the previous centuries of Islam, you had slimmers of them. You had crescents, right? And slowly it grew and grew, and now you have, in the 13th century, the full moon to show you the real light of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And that window is very small to see a full moon, right? If you try to look for it, and other days you're not going to find it. And time is passing by, so it's a genuine invitation to have dialogue with our Muslim brothers and sisters, because it's a significant issue. You can't wait for something that's past. And it's just unfortunately hurting the Muslims, our ummah, more than anything else, because it's just creating division and hatred unnecessarily. I grew up with Sunni Muslims. I had no idea about these things. I've not always been a religious person. I didn't go into the depth of Ahmadiyyat until the last years of high school.
Okay.
Right. And it's only recently that I found out that some of my friends were told not to talk to Ahmadi Muslims. And then I was like, oh, that's why they cut me off. Right? And it's unfortunate. Why, if you don't have an answer in your generation, why are you going to poison the next generation? Let them know the principles and let them figure it out if you couldn't do it. But driving someone away and causing division, it's not the way.
There is no encouragement at all to have intellectual debate or anything in circles?
So when there is, it's crafted, from what I've seen.
Okay. Meaning
that they use a strategy on what to talk about and what not to talk about. And that's not honest, that's not in good faith.
And when you say what to talk about, what not to talk about, you're not talking about just simply how a debater tries to get you into the field that they, for instance,
they try to corner you.
Yeah, I know. I've watched debates before where they generally speaking, the goal of each debater is trying to corner their opponent to get them into a situation where they have to contradict themselves. But you're not saying it's not just a good debater working their way. It's just that the actual setup of the debate itself is just.
It's both, because now Muslims have gone into Western education, so they've learned a lot of tricks from them, from debates as well. And it's a bit of both, because, like I said, if you look at the history, revelation is not an issue, prophecy is not an issue, because that's already resolved. They say that we started a new movement, or Mirza Ghulam Ahmad as a Messiah started a new movement. He started the movement before he made any claim. So it wasn't creating any division at all. There was already, I would say at least 70% of the accusations are resolved just by looking at history.
Okay.
Before his claim. If you look at history before his claim, all those problems go away. But you have to study for that, right? And not everyone does. Not everyone can. You can see behind us, these are the books that he's written. Not everyone will go into the depth of those books to figure out stuff. Even I've seen a lot of debaters today, they'll refer to books, but they haven't read the books.
Yeah.
Which is a disservice. It's like gaslighting the whole book, if you take one sentence out of context and try to present it, well, what did he speak about in the book? Right? It's not genuine.
Yeah.
There's no taqwa in that. There's no fear of God in that. Yes, you could be well intentioned, but stick to our Islamic methodology, right? If we disagree in methodology, like for example, we say Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, and then in Hadith, Bukhari is on top. If we disagree on those terms, okay, no problem. But then let's have a discussion based on whatever the terms need to be, right? Mm-hmm. But being dismissive, being cunning, being deceptive, or just speaking out of turn or in ignorance, there's no need to do it. The Quran doesn't allow us to speak about things that we don't know about, right? I don't consider myself a scholar. I would never call myself a scholar. But I've studied, right? And if someone wants to show that I'm wrong, I'm not going to be like, okay, let's hear this. Like, okay, no, tell me. Where did I go wrong? Where's the flaw in my argument? Where's the flaw in my logic? What did I miss, right? Because Muslims are supposed to be seekers. We found Islam. We're not going away from it. There's no way we're ever going away from Islam. We're only going to get closer and closer to it. And this is why the Prophet warned us that the first 3 generations will be good. There will be a gap where people will be misguided. Then guidance will come back. But at that time, the scholars will be the worst creation under the earth, under the canopy of the sky. So he's already warned us what to do, what to watch out for, who to turn to. He even said that, when you see things happening, it's better for you to just go live in the wild, right? Because you won't be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And if I was a Sunni Muslim, forget Ahmadiyya. Let's put that to the side. If I was a Sunni Muslim and I have the Prophet warning me that in the latter days certain signs will be there, and I see them happening, and if in the latter days he says that scholars will cause the most mischief and discord, troubles will emit from them and return to them, they'll be the root of everything, then I would take what they say with a grain of salt. Right? Scholarship aside, my Prophet is still king. His opinion still shadows anything that they may claim to know or whatever. He's warned us not to just blindly follow scholars. Not all of them are the same. I'm not going to generalize. There's some amazing Sunni scholars, Shia scholars, who know their respective areas of Islam very well, right? Unfortunately, this discussion doesn't progress that far. And that's a disservice, because if the scholars are supposed to guide Muslims, then there should be a proper study. Absolutely. Proper,
and a proper discussion.
Proper discussion with us. We don't bite. Unfortunately, it's become a political issue as well. One country has declared us non-Muslims, and that has become the backing for the common Muslim that, they consider you non-Muslims, and they're a country, they have a parliament, they have all this, they have a Supreme Court. Why should we not trust them? Yeah. Well, they have no foundation in your methodology. So why are you trusting them? Right? Nor does the methodology say trust your Supreme Court on the issue. Yeah. It's Quran, Sunnah, Hadith. And that's the dilemma, right? It's a significant one. At the same time, if you go online, you'll see that they hate on their scholars anyway, right? They don't trust their scholars. There's many polls that which scholar would you never go to for help, and they basically list all of them, right? So it's like they know they can't really trust their scholars, but they don't have any other option. So you can't fault them for that. They have to go to the leadership, and when they need guidance, that's who they're going to go to. And obviously, I'm not saying that they only preach falsehood or they only preach a tainted version of Islam. No, absolutely not. Whatever school of thought they follow it to a T, right? And it's not their job to resolve problems. In Hadith, the job to resolve problems is rests with the Messiah. Right? So if they can't resolve disputes, it's because they weren't meant to. The Hadith clearly mentions in Bukhari that the Messiah will come, Jesus, and he will be the judge and arbiter.
Yeah.
He's going to decide who's right and wrong on what issues. And this is what Mirza Ghulam Ahmad did. Right? Whatever the issues were that were happening, or the bones of contention or the differences of opinion, he, in his capacity as Messiah, later on, not before. So I'm talking, so before 1890, he didn't talk about these differences at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't his place. But when God told him he's the Messiah, then he started, okay, this is what's right, this is what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And then he gave the backing for it, of course, as well, right? Also, maybe after he was appointed as the reformer, he also did a few things, but those were more in practice, not in terms of doctrine. In terms of doctrine, he only started correcting Muslims after his claim. Before that, he was concerned with the Hindus and the Christians. I mean, he was defending Islam. Right? Yeah. So this is a side of it that's not really talked about. There's a lot more history that we can't.
Yeah. And I think at this point, we probably, this interview is probably going to be like an hour and a half at this point, probably at least. So maybe we should start wrapping it up a little bit.
Absolutely.
Any last statements you would want to make to anyone listening?
So, human life is what matters, and differences of opinions should not make us hate each other, right? It's an opinion. If we can agree to disagree, but let's have the conversations. And you'll find that many times perceptions are not realities.
Yeah.
I've talked to many people. I'm not that old, but I've talked to many people. I've had a lot of deep, intimate conversation. Perceptions are not reality. And we can't let certain segments of society keep us divided unnecessarily. We have minds too. One of the things that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad al-Islam has mentioned is that Allah doesn't burden people beyond their capacity, which also means that intellectually He can't make us believe something that our mind can't wrap around, right? Everything must make sense. It must have a basis. We can't work on blind faith. We can't work on unsubstantiated ideas and fantasy ideas. We can't. Our minds will go crazy. It's against our nature, right? So if a person was to analyze their beliefs and think that, because this is actually what happens. People don't know about this, and instead of having a valid avenue to go on or exit, they quit, right? They become atheists.
Yeah.
Why? Because their community of believers is sticking to a very literal understanding which the mind cannot wrap around. But that's not necessarily the right understanding. So this is what Mirza Ghulam Ahmad initially wanted to prevent Muslims from doing, that don't fall into the traps of your mind. Islam is a perfect religion, and it explains itself very clearly. If someone else doesn't have the explanation, no problem, find someone else. But don't quit. Right? Don't leave God. Don't abandon the idea of God. Just because, someone in authority said something that didn't make sense to you. Right? They don't know better.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Thank you, Farhan, for coming on here and explaining the Ahmadi perspective on some of these tough, controversial topics within Islam.
Not a problem. I'm so happy to have you.
I know that even though I'm not part of the Muslim community, I learned a lot, and this was very interesting for me. And I encourage everyone who listened, who's tuned in all the way, well, thank you for listening the whole way through this video. But I encourage you to continue to engage in open dialogue with people who may disagree with you, to have those conversations and to do so peacefully, especially during these very troubling times where there's a lot of violence, controversy going on around the world. We don't need to be part of that. We can be part of dialogue and discussion and sharing our beliefs in a respectful manner. So thank you everyone for tuning in. And as always, friends, go out there and light the world yourselves.